Okay, class. So hopefully you've already filled in your social movements chart looking at the different types and giving examples of them. So your opening journal question that I want you to answer is, what would it take to make you join a social movement? Be sure that you give 3 reasons, 3 facts to support your answer, but go through and think about what would it take for you to be motivated to make you want to go and join in whatever social movement you're interested in. All right, so what we're going to look at today is, why do people join social movements? Since they're all working towards creating changes within society, some of them focus on the individual or a society or the whole world. Some of them just want to change small little things or do a complete renovation and start from scratch. But they need people involved to get these goals, to be successful with these goals. So what we're going to do is just look at the different motivating factors that people will talk about for why they decided to join with the movement. And then you'll reflect on your own answer and what does yours most closely match up with. All right, first, just some general information. We know that social movements are when groups get together to either create a change or to stop a change. All right, so for example, a proactive social movement is trying to create a change. There's something that we've been doing in our society, there's something that's part of our culture that we need to stop doing. We need to revise the norms and change them. So for example, if you look in this picture here, this is from the abolitionist movement. All right, that's a proactive social movement. From the foundations of the United States, slavery was an entrenched system. Many people believe that it was wrong, that the country had outgrown it. And so all of these different groups that were abolitionist would be examples of proactive social movements. Right? However, if we want to stop a change, if we want to prevent that change, we would be a reactive social movement. All right, we're responding to changes that we don't think are good. We want to stop these changes. We want to keep our traditional values that have been part of our cultural identity for a long period of time. For example, the KKK, they're a reactive social movement. During Reconstruction, they wanted to keep the traditional values within the Confederate South, and so they formed this group to kind of fight these new changes that are going on. And so different social movements have different goals for why people might be drawn into them and join them. Right? In order to form power, in order for these movements to be successful, usually they form organizations. Right? So they have a core founding body, people that make the decisions, and we'll talk about that later on in the unit. But for example, the March for Our Lives. This would be an example of a proactive social movement. All right, the right to bear arms, that's a Second Amendment right, and there are people who believe that that needs to be restricted more. Easy access to guns shouldn't be available. And so they're trying to change an entrenched value that has been within our society by changing our definition of that right to bear arms to be more restricted and only to military officials in the role of their job versus easy access for the general population. The March for Our Lives, or March for Life, rather. The March for Life, that is a reactive social movement. It's in response to the passage of Roe v. Wade, where abortion was legalized, and people didn't like that. They thought that we needed to keep the traditional value, the value that life begins at conception. And so both of these groups, they formed organizations where they would have these mass marches. They also have lobbyists on Capitol Hill that are trying to create bills and legislations for their groups that are favorable towards their goals. And so they'll use these marches, these sit-ins, these worldwide actions in order to recruit members to join them and publicize what their goals are. And so propaganda becomes a really big part of these organizations as they try to encourage people to join in with them. We're going to look at propaganda next class. Right. During periods of a cultural crisis, you'll see a lot of social movements spring up around certain problems. All right. A cultural crisis is where we have divergent values within a culture manifesting different societal goals. For example, the 1960s, that was a big cultural crisis. There were a lot of issues that people had conflicting views on, a lot of fights over what the nation should be doing. There's a lot of arguments that we might be in a cultural crisis right now, as we have different groups that have very conflicting values of what our country should be doing. Worldwide cultural crises about what transnational groups should be doing to work together for improving the economy or improving the environment. And so we find more and more social movements when we're in these moments of cultural crisis. And so let's look at the different marketing techniques, let's look at the different crisis motivators for why people would buy into these organizations and join up with the groups. All right, one theory is that we join in because we feel isolated. So what mass society theory states is that people join with social movements because it gives them a sense of identity. It gives them a sense of space, of who they are. For example, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, right? Those are two long, enduring social movements. And a lot of people, they take a lot of pride in identity and the political party they affiliate themselves with. And so mass society theory would state why so many people identify with a political party and they entrench themselves within that group and buy into the values that they create. This semester, I've been taking a U.S. cults class, and so looking at various cult groups, and what they look at is why people join in with these cults is because they give that individual a sense of space. They're usually in a moment of personal crisis themselves, a transition point where their life is changing, and by being in a group, it gives them a sense of community. It helps them feel less isolated. So some people, they'll join in a social movement because they take some solace, some camaraderie, some emotional support by their membership within that community. And so they're not doing it because they get anything out of it. They're not doing it because maybe they fully believe in the values. They do it just so they can have a sense of purpose and space within society. Now, this might not always be true because we find that there's also a lot of social movement activity within strong communities, people that have intense ties to the society. So what might be a better reason for them is relative deprivation theory. All right, what relative deprivation believes is people will join a social movement because the goals of that movement will actually help them personally. I'm going to join this social movement because there's a right that I think I should have. I see other people have this right and I don't think that's fair. And so because of this, I'm going to join in with the social movement because they're fighting for something that I think I deserve and I need. All right, so for example, the American Revolution happened because there were rights that Americans thought that they wanted, that Britain wasn't allowing them. We got a lot of support from France, well, because France hated Britain, so why not? But those soldiers that were here, when they went back to France and they saw the disparity in the social classes that were present within their country, that inspired the revolution. And so they actually had a long, bloody battle for changing their society. But Germany also had a lot of social class problems. It wasn't a unified nation state just yet. And even though things were worse in Germany, since they didn't have contact with the revolutionary spirit of the colonists, they were part of Britain fighting as the Hessian soldiers over here. They didn't go home and inspire a revolution with their own community. And so it's that comparison of what you have to what others have that might spur you to start a social movement and join in with the social movement because we want that. The civil rights movements, they wanted equal rights for African Americans because they saw things that they were being held away from, they didn't have easy access to, where their white companions were doing the exact same thing and having easy access to all these different options. So I'm going to join this social movement because you're going to get me something that I don't have. So it does a good job at explaining why a lot of people are there, because it's selfishly or individually motivated, or you want something better for your children and that'll help you. But not all social movements are about deprivation. Right? There's a lot of animal rights groups. Well, helping out dogs isn't necessarily helping me at all, so why do those exist? All right, well, maybe it's because of something known as a moral commitment or an ideological commitment. Those are both used by sociologists. I think your book uses moral commitment, but if you read that it says ideological, it's the exact same thing. All right, I join in with this social movement just because I think it's the right thing to do. I'm not going to get anything out of it. I'm not going to receive anything. I don't need to be seen as part of this group for my identity and my self-worth. I'm just doing it because I think it's the right thing to do. And so people join these social movements because they're fighting against evils that they think are bad for society, and they're morally opposed to them happening. For example, the trying to get marriage rights for the gay community, right? That was a right that they thought that they had, but there was also a lot of straight individuals that were helping fight for the passage of this bill. Freedom riders during the civil rights movement, they would load themselves up on a bus and actively go down into segregated southern communities knowing that they were going to be beaten up. A lot of people who joined with this group, they were fired from their jobs or kicked out of college. And it wasn't just black individuals who participated in this, there were a lot of white individuals there as well. Right? So a moral commitment is people join social movements because this problem that the social movement is fighting against is something that I think is the right thing to do. And so I'm morally obligated to help this group because it aligns with my own personal values. Now, the last reason, and this is probably the rarest of the reasons, is that people will join a social movement because they want to tear it apart from the inside. Right? These are individuals that we would call part of the hostile public. Right? We want the social movement to fail. We don't like what the social movement is doing. The reactive social movements, they might be hostile publics to the proactive ones that are generated. And so we don't want that group to be more successful than our group, so we need to tear it apart. So an agent provocateur joins a social movement in the hopes of spying on them and then taking that information back with them to their own group, or we're going to try and destroy them from the inside. We're going to provoke this social movement to such extreme actions that nobody else is going to like them, nobody else is going to join in with them, and it's going to fail because of lack of membership. For example, if you know anything about the Watergate scandal, it was during an election while Nixon was in office. He was predicted to be the winner. He was ahead in a lot of these polls. But his campaign group actually placed members of their campaign in their opponent's campaign to spy on them, to steal facts, information, what speeches they were giving, so Nixon could be better prepared for debates, or steal some of the phrases so they wouldn't be able to use them. And they got caught while they were spying and trying to steal all this insider information. Right, we could say that those placed agents that were working for Nixon, even though they were part of the opponent's campaign, they were agent provocateurs. They wanted to spy on that social movement to degrade that campaign's ability to be successful. There are a lot of undercover agents. So, for example, the FBI, when they think that they have potential terrorist groups on soil, they'll have people join in with that social movement, try to provoke them into breaking a crime so that the FBI is justified in raiding that community and arresting the criminal offenders. During the 1960s, there was a lot of groups that were opposed to the Vietnam War. So the FBI actually infiltrated one group that was on a college campus. Oh, where was it? I think it was in California, but I'm blanking on the name right now. But this group, they didn't want the draft to continue. And the members, those undercover FBI agents, actually convinced the leaders of this organization that the best idea was, well, we need to bomb drafting facilities if they can't generate the numbers and they don't know who has to go overseas. Originally, that group was a peaceful protest movement. They were staging sit-ins, they were doing marches and speeches, but those FBI agents convinced them to create these bombs, and unfortunately, they didn't know how to do it properly, and the bombs exploded. There are other groups, similarly, where they believe that there are terrorist groups linked with Muslim communities. So these FBI agents will go in and try and provoke the organization to make extreme action. And once they break a law, it justifies the FBI kind of coming in and taking them down. And so these agent provocateurs are actually provoking the groups to extreme steps that they might not have taken on their own without those insiders kind of there and pushing them to make these extreme choices. And so sometimes people will join a movement just to tear it apart from the inside. Right, so based off of all that information, I want you to go back and relook at your original answer and then say which theory most closely matches up with why you would join a social movement. Name the specific theory, pick the one, and then give me 3 reasons, 3 similarities between what you have written and what that theory actually believes. And then once you've finished your work, go ahead and submit it, and you are done for the day. All right, have a good one.